Lethal dove. Haftarat bo. What's the most dangerous animal you could think of? This question can have various acceptable answers, from classic responses like Dorothy's cry in the stage version of Wizard of Oz, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, to statistical answers showing that more people die from mosquitoes each year than from any other animal. One answer you probably wouldn't encounter is the dove. Why do I feel this need to state the obvious? Because readers of our Haftarah might get the impression that life in the 7th century BCE was different. Am I suggesting that 7th century BCE Mesopotamian parents warned their small children that if they don't finish their watermelon, squash, and garlic, a dove would come and devour them? Not necessarily. But our Haftarah beseeches that we investigate what the fleeing Egyptian means when he speaks of escaping the sword of the dove. Before proceeding, here's a brief summary of our Haftarah. Yirmiyahu prophesies that beautiful Egypt will be conquered by the Babylonian conqueror, who will cut it down mercilessly. Israel shouldn't worry. Hashem will return them to their land. In other words, we have a different prophet, Yirmiyahu, instead of Yechezkel, and different words instead of the great crocodile. Egypt is a beautiful heifer, but our Haftarah is a rerun of last week's Haftarah. Let's return to our question. Most early medieval commentators explain that our main problem is that we don't know Hebrew. Cherev Hayonah isn't the sword of a small armed bird that always returns home. The point they didn't always agree on, to put it mildly, is the alternative meaning. Why, to put it mildly? Because sometimes, as we'll see with Rashi, they didn't even agree with themselves. In his first interpretation, Rashi explains, citing the Targum, that Cherev Hayonah means the sword of the enemy that is like saturated wine. Yonah being an alternative term for yain, wine. I'm not sure if the enemy's sword that's saturated like wine refers to the amount of saturating blood spilled by Nebuchadnezzar's sword, as Rabbi Yosef Kara explains, to his warriors' battle lust, or to the red color that evokes winey associations. I do know that something prevented Rashi from leaving this as his only interpretation, which leads us to the next explanation. Here Rashi explains that Yonah is a term for deception, hona'ah. And here too, the words can be understood in several ways. We could understand them like Abarbanel understood, that the deception referred to was Nebuchadnezzar's smooth talk that preceded his warfare, or perhaps through trickery, promising things that he couldn't fulfill, or maybe threatening that if they didn't accept his words, he would have to bring the sword, or maybe like the story of Sancherib's commanders who approached Chizkiah's besieged army and speak to them in Hebrew to lower their morale. Here too, the Yonah isn't a bird, it means deception. Radak, though typically concluding with quoting the Targum, first explains that Yonah means forcing. He uses a slightly more forceful word, but for our purposes this is enough. He uses two verses to prove his method with two similar words like Yonu and Monim. Once again, however, our Yonah is fundamentally different from the peace dove we were raised on. Shadal, citing Rabbi Azariah de Rossi, and Malbim explain that our Hebrew is fine. Nebuchadnezzar had a dove image on his flag. But here their interpretations diverge. Shadal doesn't accept this explanation because in Sefer Tzfanya, Yerushalayim is also called the Dove City, and we don't know of a Jerusalem dove flag. Therefore, he brings us back to the language of deception, which in his opinion means violence and robbery. Malbim keeps the dove on the flag, but explains that it's more than just a symbol. Nebuchadnezzar would attribute all his victories to it as if it were an idol. What can I add to the interpretive and linguistic variety that we've seen so far? Not much, but I can suggest a combination of several interpretations that we've seen. Perhaps, as Malbim said, Nebuchadnezzar conquers under the dove flag, and yet it's a great deception. Maybe, and this is just a suggestion, the Babylonian dove symbolizes for Nebuchadnezzar what it represents today. Peace. He knocks on the door of whichever kingdom he plans on conquering next, and talks about world peace. Beat your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. Only not everyone aligns with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian vision of world peace. The reasons can vary. They want independence, money, religion, land, and other things. Nebuchadnezzar proves that the peace he leads also has a sword. It has an edge. What began as a call for peace was a great, forceful, and sharp deception. It's drunk on its own power. It turned itself into an idol. In its name, any other value can be trampled. To the misfortune of Egyptians and ancient Mesopotamia, the sword of the dove tramples everything. Fortunately, this is no longer relevant. In memory of my beloved and heroic student, Amichai Shimon ben Ishai and Batya Rubin Hashem Mikom Damo, Tovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.